But athletes do dumbass things if it improves their performance.
I'd like you to imagine you turn on the TV to watch the Olympic 100-meter final. Now you're expecting to see athletes getting into the starting block. But instead of seeing starting blocks, each athlete is holding a garden trowel. And they're digging holes in the track surface that they're then putting their feet in to start their race. Now I know this sounds ridiculous, but this is how athletes started sprint races in the early 1900s. And as we all know, change, it's not always welcomed. In just a moment, we're going to take a look at George Simpson and why this was his reaction after just breaking a world record. But first, if you've been following along with the band technique series, we've looked at the spinning javelin, the somersault long jump, the cartwheel shot put, and many more. Now sometimes, like the ones I just mentioned, it's because of a safety issue. Other times, it's because it provides some kind of unfair advantage or it's against the spirit of the sport. And other times, like the scratch foul and the triple jump, or how they used to not allow drinking water at endurance events, techniques that were once against the rules were later unbanned, and that's what we're going to see in this video. And I encourage you to stick around to the end of this video because I'm going to show some clips of some of these banned techniques, and also I'm going to provide a link to the full playlist where you can go check them out. So our story starts at a time before these rubber synthetic all-weather tracks that we see today. It was actually before 1968, track surfaces were made of dirt or a gravel or crushed red cinder. That's what athletes would run on. And if you want to learn more about this transition from dirt to rubber tracks, go check out the brush spike band technique video I did, and it goes into that in a little bit more detail. Alright, so if you think about when an athlete starts a race, what they're trying to do is they're trying to apply as much force as possible into the ground as they accelerate. They're not getting enough grip on that initial movement as they try to overcome inertia. So a common technique at the time to account for this was that every athlete would carry a trowel out on the track with them, and they would dig their own holes in the track that they would place their feet into, which would give them a little bit extra grip, and it would put themselves in an optimal position to create maximum drive from the power that they generated. In addition to these holes being unstable, they also had to be filled after each and every heat. So if you're in the first heat, hey, that's great. But if you're in the fourth heat, think about it like you go to a driving range to play some golf with your buddy. Now your buddy is a really nice guy, but he's a terrible golfer. So you get to the driving range and every single spot's taken except for one area. So your buddy goes first, and remember, he's a great guy, but he's a terrible golfer. So every swing is a divot. Well, he's a nice guy, so he takes some sand, he tries to fill up the holes, but by the time he goes through his whole bucket of balls, there's no more grass left. Well, you can imagine when it's your turn to go, the surface is going to suck. Therefore, when we look back to the early 1920s in Melbourne, Australia, they ran on these dirt track surfaces, but not only did the track and field athletes run on it, but also so did racing dogs like greyhounds. So there was this tension between the dog owners and the track and field officials because the dog owners would complain saying, you know, hey, our dogs are spraining their ankles and are falling in these holes getting injured. And so there's this tension that existed in trying to get people to stop digging holes in the track. Well, we look back to 1921, and there was an athlete named Charlie Booth. He was 17 years old, and he's getting ready for one of his races. So Charlie goes out in the front yard, and he starts digging holes in his front yard because he's trying to practice. You know, how far do I need to put the holes apart, space them, just working on getting out. Well, you can imagine as a dad, you've just, mowed your nice lawn and it looks all great, but then your son goes and now he's created holes everywhere. So the dad goes out and he's frustrated and he said, hey, stop digging holes in my front yard. Let's come to some kind of compromise. So Charlie and his dad go into the garage and they take some wood, they make a T-frame, and they nail on some pieces of plywood on either side. Well, this would actually become the first evidence of block start. So Charlie's so excited, he takes these blocks and he goes to his first race, says, hey, can I use it? They say, sure. So he puts them down, he runs his race, and he wins. Well, some people weren't so excited about that and they started complaining. So the officials decided to disqualify him for cheating and they banned him for life. Now you can imagine how upset everybody was in the situation about this. The dad eventually did get it reversed, but in the meantime, there was quite a big uproar about this, and this got worldwide attention. There was a lot of interest into the how and why he got banned from around the world. People were curious about what was this new starting device that helped him win and why it was banned. And so kind of picking up on the interest that they were getting, Charlie and his dad went and filed a patent for the first ever wooden blocks. And so these starting blocks started to get a lot of attention. Over the next couple years, there was various patents filed for these starting blocks or these foot supports. And so starting blocks and adjustable foot pedals eventually started to become commonplace. And by the end of the 1920s, pretty much everybody used them. This was especially true in the NCAA, where some of the larger NCAA meets, it was actually uncommon to not see an athlete using starting blocks. So now think back to the beginning of this video. We looked at George Simpson and why he was less than enthusiastic about breaking a world record. Well, George Simpson was a sprinter from Ohio State University, and in the final of the 1929 NCAA Track and Field Championships, George became the first person to break 9.5 seconds in the 100-yard dash, and he did so with a time of 9.4 seconds. This was a pretty big improvement. This would have been a major world record, but he used starting blocks. Now, the use of starting blocks was common in the NCAA, and it was actually the preferred method for sprints. But track and field's world governing body, IAAF, or now World Athletics, they did not officially recognize starting blocks at that time, and they didn't universally accept them until 1937. Matter of fact, starting blocks didn't make their appearance at the Olympics until 1948. And there's one more thing that makes this just a bit more complex. You see, about 15 years later, in 1944, the United States governing body apparently decided that since starting blocks eventually became not only common but required, and because in that 100-meter NCAA final, every athlete in the race was also using starting blocks, therefore it didn't really give any individual athlete an unfair advantage, George Simpson was retroactively recognized as the American record holder. However, to this day, the IAAF, which is now World Athletics, they have not changed their stance. But we have seen other examples of world records being retroactively awarded, such as in 2021 when the US long jumper Phil Shinnick was retroactively recognized as a world record holder due to the fact that when he jumped and he broke that world record, there was no wind reading. So now let's look at the big picture. Today, we have full foot pedals that have pressure sensors that can disqualify an athlete if their reaction time is less than 1/10 of a second. We have high-speed cameras and auto-timing systems that can let you know exactly when an athlete takes off and when they pass the finish line. We have more data than we've ever been able to record. We've seen over the years the change from short pedals to full foot pedals. We've seen the change of pedals being fixed in place to being modular, where you can change the orientation, angle, and position of where the pedal sits, and change in designs. The sport has evolved. Is it simply a question that because it was not officially legal at the time, it should remain unvalidated? Or should we look back and acknowledge that this was part of the evolution? So before I show you some of these other band techniques that I've covered, I want to hear from you. What do you think about George Simpson? And do you think he should retroactively be awarded the acknowledgement of breaking a world record? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And thanks for watching.
Can you do that? Well, the answer actually is pretty interesting. In many ways, this might surprise you.
Athletes do dumbass things if it improves their performance. Athletes do dumbass things if it improves their performance. Athletes do dumbass things if it improves their performance.